the crisis caused an unprecedented shock in energy markets, a shock of unprecedented breadth and complexity. It drove European gas prices to historically high levels. It also had an impact, obviously, on electricity prices, but also more generally, price of fertilizers and food prices. And so if we have to read the analysis of the crisis, it's clear that this is actually more severe, much more severe than in the gas crisis in 2006 and the gas crisis in 2009, when supplies through Ukraine of Russian gas to Europe were temporarily disrupted. It's also more severe, and it's more and it's broader and it's more complex than the oil shocks in the 70s, because it has repercussions on different markets, and it's a truly global crisis because the price increases and supply disruptions affected not just, I mean, they centered on Europe, but they also affected the Asian market, as Europe relied on LNG supplies on the global market to compensate for the loss of Russian gas. So the implications were not limited, certainly not limited to Europe. They were truly global. Now, next slide, please. All right. So this has led to accusations on the weaponization of energy by Russia. So this is, for instance, an accusation that is made by the European Commission. It's also made by the US, but also it's analyzed in the work of the International Energy Agency. For instance, the World Energy Outlook explains that Russia sought to gain political leverage by withholding gas supplies and by exposing consumers to extraordinary high prices over the winter heating season. Now, weaponization of energy is closely related and linked in the literature to dependencies. So energy can only be weaponized if dependencies have been created. In the words of James Henderson from the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies, by accepting the creation of dependencies, the state that is being facing the weaponization, the importer threatened, has arguably armed the energy weapon itself. So the weaponization and the crisis and the response to the crisis triggered a profound reassessment of dependencies beyond EU-Russia gas relations. So, for instance, in Europe has started to think and reassess its dependencies on China, for instance, on critical minerals from China and on clean technologies from China. This is not limited to Europe or the EU. You also see this in the UK, in Canada, in the US, a broader rethinking of dependencies and a perception of dependencies as strategic dependencies that could be weaponized. And so in that context of broader rethink of dependencies and perceived threat of weaponization, today what I will try to do, and again, this is based on my book on energy dependence and supply security, what I'm trying to do is to look at Central Asia. And Central Asia is only one part of the book. The book looks at other parts of the world, the EU, China, etc. But it includes a Central Asia dimension, and that is what I will focus on today. And and Shemerden Chikanaev will then continue the analysis looking at Kazakhstan. And the question I'm trying to answer today is how dependencies, energy dependencies, have been created in Central Asia, dependencies on Russia, and how these dependencies could then be managed, taking into account the potential risk these dependencies can cause for the importing countries. And I have a legal background. I'm a professor of law, so the analysis focuses on agreements, how agreements, energy agreements, are used or can be used to create dependencies, and then what legal measures have to be taken to manage these dependencies. And before I go into the specific Central Asian analysis, I need to provide some theoretical background. And the first thing I need to do is to introduce the theory on the liberal approach to energy market regulation and how this is expected to contribute to securing energy supplies. Because obviously, secure energy supplies is what is opposed to disruptions of energy supplies. So according to the liberal approach to energy market regulation and supply security, the market is expected to ensure reliable and secure energy supply. That means uninterrupted energy supply. This is based on legal arrangements at the national and international level and regional level that aim at enabling and protecting foreign investment and trade. So foreign investments are seen as something essential to supply security that have to be protected and enabled. Supply security is achieved through competition, through cooperation, and interdependence is actually something good. It's part of the architecture, it's part of something to be essentially maintained. The market is seen as the best guarantee of supply security, and companies in that architecture are expected to operate at arm's length from the government, and they are expected to invest in pursuit of profit. Now, this is the liberal approach, and it's the approach followed by the EU, that is the paradigm, essentially, that has governed the EU energy market for the last 2 decades. It's something that has been put in place in Europe, but also that Europe has promoted at the international level. For instance, with the Energy Charter Treaty, that treaty that was promoted and established after the collapse of the Soviet Union to promote investments in the energy sector in the former Soviet Union. It's also an approach, a model that the EU is promoting in its neighborhood with the Energy Community Treaty. So the European Union is actively promoting essentially the export of its liberal model to the region. The contrasting theory is economic statecraft, and could say also energy geopolitics. Now, that's a theory that points to the use that governments can make of investments, energy trade, as instruments to exercise geopolitical power. In that perspective, or following that approach, state-owned enterprises, companies, and in particular state-owned enterprises, do not invest only in pursuit of profit, can also invest in pursuit of geopolitical power, in pursuit of foreign policy objectives. And dependencies are seen as dangerous. As I explained, Henderson sees dependencies as what arms the energy weapon. Now, there's a lot of literature on how Russia and other countries follow that, essentially that model, and seek to create dependencies through investments, through trade, as an instrument of energy statecraft, as a geopolitical mechanism. Now, linked to that is the use of agreements. So there's not a lot of literature on how essentially law, international law, energy investment law, energy trade law, can actually be used as an instrument of geopolitical power. And I think it's important to link both agreements, so legal instruments of energy trade and investment, and energy geopolitics. And also how these instruments, these legal instruments, can be used in spheres of influence. How legal instruments of energy investment and trade can be used in spheres of influence to achieve control and exclusion. Spheres of influence can be defined as areas where hegemonic power seeks to exercise control over other states and seeks to exclude foreign influence by competing powers. So there is literature on Russia's approaches to international law, including investment, energy, trade law. And that literature points to the role of international law in spheres of influence. And there's also interesting literature on the geopolitical competition in the contested neighborhood of the EU and Russia, and how Russia perceives Europe's attempt at exporting its liberal model to the region as something that is as an attempt of meddling in the domestic affairs of the post-Soviet states in ways that would incline their governments against Russia. And Russia is then understood to react to that by proposing a counter order to that liberal model. So let me now look more specifically at essentially pipelines. And I will start with the origins of pipeline dependencies. And I will start with the Soviet Union, essentially. And I was starting with the very early stages of the Soviet gas industry. Gas had a geopolitical function of essentially of control, if we are to believe the literature. So, and agreements were part of that policy. So, gas and gas pipeline agreements were used to promote integration, political integration in the Soviet, within the Soviet Union itself, but also within the Soviet sphere of influence, so with the socialist republics, for instance. And there is fascinating literature on how Soviet gas supply agreements have been used as tool of alliance management. I greatly recommend Margarita Balmaceda's work. Also, there is a lot of interesting work on how Soviet gas supply agreements are used as an instrument to maintain the Soviet empire, so to speak. The Soviets deliver their gas to Eastern Europe on a barter basis at cut-rate prices in exchange for loyalty and cooperation, according to Gustafson's great work on Russian-Europe relations. The socialist republics received a substantial net subsidy in the form of discounted gas in exchange of overpriced machinery. And these created dependencies, and it set out a certain infrastructure, an infrastructure geography, you could say, that shaped the energy social contract in the region. And so these are infrastructure legacies that continue to be extremely important, that shape the dependencies that we're looking at and that we're facing today. So this approach was continued after the essentially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We see gas supply still being used as a tool of a geopolitical influence, and agreements being used to formalize this use of gas. And there are many examples, and it's documented in a great amount of works. I just want to point to two interesting examples. The first one is the Kharkiv Treaty that was signed after the essentially the 2009 gas crisis in Ukraine, and that formalized a discount, the gas discount that Ukraine received in exchange of extending the lease of Russia's Black Sea fleet in Crimea, in Ukraine. But there are other examples of subsidized gas supplies in exchange of giving over control over strategic infrastructure. For instance, in Belarus, in Armenia, and I will look specifically at the case of Kyrgyzstan, and what we see is essentially that Gazprom obtains control over strategic gas assets in exchange of discounted gas prices, and often also following the threat of price increases. As I said, there's a lot of literature documenting this strategy. So that's the idea of control, as I've outlined from a theoretical perspective. The idea of using gas agreements to seek control over, in this case, over strategic assets. At the same time, there's the idea of exclusion of foreign influence. These agreements, as I will explain in a moment, exclude or try to block reform following the liberal model. And in case of geopolitical shifts, discounted gas deals are being essentially terminated. And a great example of that is the decision by the Russian government to stop the discounted gas supplies to Ukraine after the annexation of Crimea, but there are many other examples of these terminations of discounted supplies following geopolitical shifts, essentially as a way of keeping, instrument of exclusion, you could argue. So let me now focus specifically on Central Asia. And I will start by looking at the 2013 intergovernmental agreement between Kyrgyzstan and Russia, governing cooperation in the sphere of transport, distribution, and supply of gas in the territory of Kyrgyzstan. Now, this agreement essentially formalizes a transfer to Gazprom of the Kyrgyz gas infrastructure, in exchange of a commitment by Russia through Gazprom to invest quite substantial amount in the development of the Kyrgyz gas infrastructure, but also in exchange of discounted gas supplies. Now, these discounted gas supplies are not formalized in the treaty, but are clearly acknowledged by Gazprom itself. So if you look at the website, and I haven't checked recently, but this is part of the book. So at the time it was still up to date, the website at least. The website of Gazprom explicitly acknowledges that the tariff set for Gazprom, Kyrgyzstan, by the Kyrgyz government does not cover the cost of purchasing, transporting, and storing natural gas. So they are operating at a loss. And the deficit here, that loss, is subsidized directly by Gazprom. So you might wonder why Gazprom is ready to engage in this kind of subsidized supplies. At the same time, the agreement, so the 2013 gas cooperation agreement, imposes far-reaching constraints on Kyrgyzstan's energy sovereignty. So first of all, it imposes an import monopoly. So only Gazprom can import gas to Kyrgyzstan. And that's a very significant constraint on essentially energy security. They're fully dependent on one entity for their gas imports. Gas imported cannot be re-exported abroad. And that makes sense because they get gas at discounted price. They don't want to, of course, they won't. It's part of a geopolitical deal that has to be limited to the receiving country. So destination clauses prevent the receiving country from sharing that benefit. And there is a commitment in the agreement by Kyrgyzstan, an obligation not to restructure the gas company, the gas utility. So there can be no corporate restructuring. And this agreement is enforced through arbitration, and significant compensation is due if Kyrgyzstan's obligations are breached. So it means that if any of the commitments isn't met, Gazprom can go to international arbitration, international courts, and essentially enforce the deal and require billions of US dollars in compensation. So that deal is difficult to understand based on the liberal model, because clearly it's not difficult to see the profit and Gazprom is gaining from it. It's explicitly acknowledging that it's losing money. So we have to look at more strategic motives. And this is confirmed in the literature. Different analysts see this deal as enabling Russia to increase its political leverage, to gain political leverage over Kyrgyzstan. Another interpretation is that this can also help Russia to counter influence, so exclude foreign influence in the region. For instance, so essentially by blocking reform, corporate restructuring reform, market reform, it becomes very difficult for other powers in the region to essentially advocate for the export of their liberal model. That liberal model, as I said, is seen as something that enables these countries to meddle in Russia's sphere of influence. And indeed, it's explicitly acknowledged by some EU officials that this external policy is seen as an attempt at keeping a regional hegemon, and that means Russia, at distance. So by trying to prevent reforms, we could see that Russia is trying, a possible interpretation is Russia is trying to counter the export of the liberal model to the region. Other deals in the region have been interpreted as strategic, and based on that geopolitical quid pro quo, investments in hydropower plants in Kyrgyzstan, for instance, are a good example of that. And there's quite some literature on this issue. And I want to refer to a recent development, and Shemerden will discuss this at length or into more detail if I think that if the technical issue is solved here. And so the development is the recent deals that have been made between Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan on the supply of Russian gas to these countries. So both transit and then supply to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Some have qualified this as a new Russia-Kazakhstan-Uzbekistan Gas Union. My understanding is that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan oppose this union qualification. They see it more as just a supply deal, not as a political or geopolitical development. But and so I don't want to discuss that. I don't want to reflect on whether that union, possible union, is geopolitical or not, and whether there are political aspects that are directly and explicitly associated to it. What I want to emphasize, however, is the impact of this deal on reforms in these countries. I think that's extremely important. And Shimaden will look at Kazakhstan. I want to look at the case of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is facing a major problem of gas shortage. It's struggling to meet its export obligations to China, and even on the domestic market, it has obviously massive gas production potential, but it's struggling to meet demand. And that's mainly because of major inefficiencies, insufficient investments in the modernization of the infrastructure, but also in production. And so to address these inefficiencies, and these inefficiencies are explicitly acknowledged, I think by most, to address these inefficiencies, the government engaged in reforms. So first, a corporate restructuring reform of Uzbek Neftegas and unbundling, creation of distribution, transmission companies, in addition to production company that remains with Uzbek Neftegas. So that's important. It's corporate restructuring to increase efficiency of the sector. And then in 2019, the president announced more far-reaching market reforms, saying that Uzbekistan would engage in price reforms, and Uzbekistan would engage in proper market reforms, create a gas exchange, and all this. And that's very encouraging from a market reform perspective, efficiency improvement perspective. However, not much has happened. And we can understand the recent development of instead of improving efficiency domestically, relying on Russian gas imports. We could see that possibly as a way, as an indication that these reforms are unlikely to proceed. So instead, the choice is taken to rely on Russian gas. At least there is a risk that instead of improving domestic efficiency, the choice is made to rely on more supply, and in particular supply from Russia. That's dangerous because it creates dependencies, new dependencies, and who knows, this could also result in gas to infrastructure deals, particularly given the increasing importance of China for Russia. We could potentially see some developments there where Russia will try to obtain control over the infrastructure, as we've seen happening in other transit countries. Another important geopolitical element here, or legal tool, that is often associated with the exercise by Russia of geopolitical control in the region, is the Eurasian Economic Union. So again, there's a lot of literature explaining the Eurasian Economic Union as a Russia-led initiative that aims at securing control over the region. I know there are alternative explanations, but this is one of the dominant narratives in the literature. And the gas market is clearly part of that. And what is interesting with the Eurasian Economic Union is that at first phase, it is aiming at creating an integrated gas market. So in Russia, including Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, an integrated gas market, Belarus, based on liberal principles. So if you read the Eurasian Economic Union Treaty and the gas concept, you will see references to pricing reforms, competitive pricing, gas exchanges, third-party access to the network. These are all principles and mechanisms that you find and that are key pillars of the liberal model governing the organization of energy markets. However, if you look further and more into the details, you will see that this is not really, in the details at least, it doesn't follow the liberal model. So price regulation is likely to continue. More fundamentally, price deals were given to countries in exchange of accession. There's a lot of literature explaining how Armenia, for instance, received pricing benefits in exchange of acceding to the Eurasian Economic Union. And this means acceding to the Eurasian Economic Union meant giving up on association with the European Union. So there is a clear strategic and geopolitical dimension here. Regarding third-party access, that means that third parties can access natural pipeline monopolies. That's, again, an idea that is central to the liberal model. But if you read the details, the provisions of the treaty in detail, you will see that actually vertically integrated companies, like Gazprom, for instance, are exempted essentially of third-party access. There is a special regime that protects essentially these vertically integrated entities, making it very difficult to implement third-party access. So how to understand these provisions? Well, a potential interpretation is, again, control and exclusion. Gazprom maintains control over gas exports through the exemption to third-party access and exclusion of foreign influence. Price deals have been given to convince countries to join the Eurasian Economic Union, giving up on closer integration with the European Union. Now, how to manage these dependencies? And I think these dependencies have to be managed. We've seen the consequences of these dependencies in 2006, 2009, and even more severely in 2022. So the first element here is market reforms. So market reforms have to be promoted. Why? Well, for a simple reason, they promote efficiency. And that's what is needed to reduce dependencies on fossil fuels, and in particular, dependencies on imports in this case of Russian gas. So what kind of market reforms? Pricing reforms, but also corporate restructuring reforms. And in fact, pricing reforms have to be accompanied by other types of reforms because they are very, as Yamaden will explain, these are reforms that are very difficult to implement in the region and that can lead to unrest. So the population needs to understand that other measures are being taken to improve managerial efficiency, to reduce corruption, to reduce theft, to improve payment, and to improve efficiency in general. At the same time, market integration in Central Asia is a potentially very important solution to the threat of weaponization. And that's the key lesson of the 2022 energy crisis in Europe. Europe has responded in a spirit of solidarity to the weaponization of energy supplies. So they have had coordinated mechanisms. And clearly, this would also help in Central Asia. So coordinating with each other. Turkmenistan provides, for instance, a massive basis for alternative supplies. And together, I think the shock could be more easy to absorb. Now, of course, market reforms currently are not possible in Kyrgyzstan based on the agreement with Russia. So this agreement needs to be dealt with, in my view. And so one option is would be to try to terminate it, but that would result in massive compensation. So international law arguments are potentially useful. The idea of unlawfulness due to economic coercion potentially could provide an avenue of reflection, but also the idea of trying to block arbitration by presenting the deal as a geopolitical investment, as a deal made in pursuit of foreign policy objectives, and not a commercial project. Another priority, in my view, is, and of course this is shared by many, is diversification by promoting clean energies. So clean energies are now at the center of the European and global response to supply security. Clean energy, for instance, solar photovoltaics are now one of the cheapest sources of energy. So they're being now part of this securitization. So clean energy is being securitized, are part of the security of supply response to weaponization. But they're also an answer to unaffordable energy supply because they're actually now much cheaper than fossil fuels. And there is momentum, there is international momentum on the promotion of these clean energy sources. For instance, China's Belt and Road Initiative is now moving away from coal and promoting clean energy investments as part of the greening of the Belt and Road. The ADB invests in energy transition, and the G7 in the Just Energy Transition Partnership. So there's huge momentum at the international level to support that transition towards clean energy sources. Now, the risk, of course, is that this could create new dependencies. There's increasing concern about this, the dependencies on China. And of course, this is an issue in Central Asia. So dependencies on clean technologies, critical minerals, perhaps less clean technologies from China, and investments, infrastructure investments from China. Now, when looking at these concerns from a Central Asian perspective, and I mean, more generally also European perspective, I think it's very important to understand that the impact of a potential weaponization of these technologies is very different to the weaponization of gas or oil. Why? Well, because disruptions of clean technology exports do not affect existing investments. If China would, for some reason, stop supplying solar panels, well, that's not going to impact on existing production of electricity from solar panels already built and installed in Central Asia. In terms of infrastructure risks, there's always, if these are seen as posing a risk, there's also always a possibility to nationalize, and even before nationalization, to engage in proper security reviews. So to conclude, what we see essentially is the use of agreements, bilateral, tripartite, multilateral, to secure influence, more specifically to exercise control and to exclude foreign influence through the liberal model. A question is whether this approach of providing subsidized deals in exchange of control and exclusion is sustainable post-2022 gas crisis. Russia lost the European market largely, and that market was really important for cross-subsidizing discounted gas supplies in Russia and in the region. So can that be sustained? And how can these dependencies be managed? Well, I've argued for stronger focus on reforms. Very important to implement these market reforms. It's important to work together to integrate the market, and it's important to diversify, so work and look at clean energies. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anatole, for this very impressive and comprehensive presentation. I mean, Anatole says even much more, of course, in his books. So let's try now to have Shaimerden. So let's try. So I'm just going to introduce him briefly. So Shaimerden Shikanaya is a PhD researcher at the University of Hong Kong. He has over 15 years of experience in the field of infrastructure law as partner of the biggest law firm in Central Asia, Grata Law, and as in-house counsel of an international financial institution. Chambers Legal 500 Asia Law Profiles and International Financial Law Review consistently rank him among the top Kazakhstani lawyers for his experience in project finance, public-private partnerships, M&A, and capital markets. So, Shaimerden, the floor is yours. Let's see if it works now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and I shall proceed. So, my role is kind of supplementary to Professor Wood. Basically, as I see it, is give you a little bit of inside perspective, because Professor Wood and legal scholars, how to say, from the global north, from Western legal scholars, they have their own perspective in terms of Russian influence and Russian geopolitical games and the role that Central Asia plays. So, as I mentioned, my role is to give you a little bit of insider perspective. Insider, it means that I am myself from Kazakhstan, from Central Asia. So I guess my perspective can be a little bit different from the perspective of Professor Wood, who has more kind of international Western legal scholar perspective on the issues. And sometimes we have kind of friendly discussions, sometimes even different opinions on same matters. For example, one of the issues sometimes we have different opinions on is the role of Russia in and the role of influence of Russia in terms of its using energy as a weapon. So one of the points I want to make is that from my perspective as a legal scholar, as a practitioner from Central Asia, from Kazakhstan, that influence of Russia in our times after Russia embarked and started the war in Ukraine is actually that for Kazakhstan and for Central Asia in general, maybe is the influence of Russia as we have it now in terms of trying to export gas through Central Asia and through Kazakhstan actually is a blessing. It's a good thing, and it's actually an opportunity for countries of Central Asia, and in my case for Kazakhstan in particular, to proceed with long overdue reforms in a manner which will be the most beneficial for my country and for my people. So let me explain my point, why I think that in this case, Kazakhstan, if the government of Kazakhstan will do it wisely, if the government of Kazakhstan will be able to kind of balance the interests of great powers in a smart way, we actually can use this opportunity in terms of diversion of Russian gas export from the west to the east for our own benefit. So let me again start from the beginning. Professor But mentioned about two dimensions of Russian influence. One dimension is Eurasian common gas market. So what is the Eurasian gas market? In simple words, if to say it briefly, Eurasian common gas market, which is something similar to European Union single gas market, but it's a little bit different. Actually, there is a big difference between these two models. I will not go into the details. I will just say my understanding on very high level. So instead of having one real single gas market where there are no borders between the countries, the proposed target model of Eurasian common gas market suggests that there still will be invisible borders between countries. So unlike, again, single gas market of Europe, Eurasian common gas market will have borders, and it will not, for example, the main problem right now for why still countries cannot agree on the terms of how this common gas market will operate is that because Belarus, for example, insists that the companies of Belarus shall be able to benefit from this common gas market by be able to buy the gas at the same terms, so basically to be treated equally as consumers in neighboring regions of Russia. So this is a deal breaker for Belarus, and this is a deal breaker for other gas importing countries like Armenia and Kyrgyzstan, because the only benefit they see, strictly speaking, in the common gas market and generally in the Eurasian Economic Union is to be able to benefit from cheap energy, in our case, from cheap gas. And this is a deal breaker again, because even before the war in Ukraine, even before the gas crisis of 2022, Russia and Kazakhstan were not very interested to proceed with real partnership in terms of common gas market. The idea of Russia and Kazakhstan was somehow to preserve the current models of gas markets they have, which suggests that Russia and Kazakhstan will proceed with cross-subsidization of their own population and of their own industries. And they don't want, Russia and Kazakhstan, they didn't want to treat all consumers, all countries equally. They wanted to again, to have preferential treatment for their own population and for their own industries, which again makes sense, but doesn't make sense for gas importing countries of the Eurasian Economic Union. So as you're probably aware from the news, we have now a big tension between Russia and Armenia. Armenia is about to exit, some experts suggest, from the political union with Russia. And I cannot exclude that same thing can happen with economic union, which is Eurasian Economic Union. So one may argue that Eurasian Economic Union and Eurasian Economic Common Gas Market is doomed. Another dimension of Russian influence, which is Professor Wood mentioned, is a new development, is a tripartite gas union, which from the perspective of many scholars and experts, is a game changer. Why is that? Because again, this is maybe for the audience who is not very familiar with the latest developments. So let me just briefly to tell you what's going on right now in the region in terms of, again, tripartite gas union. So basically what's happened, Russia lost a big market, as you're probably aware, the Europe. And to the best of my knowledge, the export from Russia through gas pipelines to Europe in 2021 was reached 100 BCM. It's almost lost this market by now, and the only success Russia managed to achieve so far by March 2024 is actually it found just one new market, that is Central Asia. In last year, Russia managed to sign concrete contracts with both Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which already provides a legal right for Gazprom to export to Uzbekistan 3 BCM of natural gas through Kazakhstan. And just recently, there was another announcement that Uzbekistan actually now wants to triple this amount by 2026. So it will be 11 BCM by 2026 of export from Russia through Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan. And the prospects are huge because the total capacity of the gas pipeline, of the existing gas pipeline, unlike, again, big change from declared by Russia from west to east, you cannot basically divert, unlike oil, as you're probably aware, gas needs to be shipped normally through gas pipelines. So Russia cannot build in 1 year or in 2 years even a new gas pipeline to China. China, as you can see, is not very willing to give money or to build it itself. So the Russians came up with the idea, which so far works very well, to make reversal of the gas streams, which so far used to be from actually gas-rich Central Asia region to Europe through Russia. Now, instead of going that way, it will go the opposite way. So basically, Russia will use the existing gas pipeline to export gas first to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, but actually, as again, these are confidential probably agreements, and neither you or me can find anything in public domain. But there are speculations that Gazprom and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan already in the process of negotiation of the 15 years long contracts, which most likely suggests that Gazprom wants to secure a right to for Russian gas transit to be shipped not only to China, but other South Asian countries. So potentially this is a really game changer, this tripartite gas union, which de jure is not a gas union, but de facto it seems to be the case. And why it's serious? Because even Turkmenistan, another huge gas exporter, actually is worried that the existing Central Asia-China gas pipeline capacity will be misused from his perspective, because instead of exporting to China Turkmen gas, it will be used for exporting Russian gas. This is a map, and as you can see, the Central Asia Center pipeline, which I mentioned before, which before was used mainly for exporting from Central Asia to the north through Russia to Europe. Now it will be, as title suggests, the Jordan reverses flow. So the gas river reverses flow. It will be used to importing gas from Russia to Central Asia, and potentially you can see green in green color potential future gas pipeline to the South Asia. Two dimensions, as I mentioned. Why two dimensions? Because Eurasian Economic Union, a common gas market, if it will be hopefully launched in 2025 as officially declared, suggests that there will be a statutory requirement on the basis of international treaty that Kazakhstan would be required to pursue a coordinated energy policy. So from one side, again, this is to confirm the proposition by Professor Booth that Russia will be able to use Eurasian Economic Common Gas Market as a leverage to pursue its energy policy, basically to control the energy policy of other Central Asian countries. Another dimension is trilateral gas union just discussed. The risk which is mentioned is again that Central Asian countries, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in particular, will trade off their independence, energy security in exchange for cheap gas, because again, this is makes sense from political perspective. So what we see now, let's come back to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan faces a great dilemma. Kazakhstan is a big country. We have a lot of natural gas reserves, but they were badly mismanaged. And by 2021, 2022, the country faced energy crisis. You probably saw news and from Uzbekistan and from Central Asia, you could see pictures of people burning wood, coal, etc., trying to heat their flats in the winter of 2022. And this is a paradox, again, because being so energy rich, at the same time, you cannot even supply and secure the domestic consumption. Why we came to this kind of state of affairs? Why Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan? I think Uzbekistan faces similar problems for the same reasons, or there are a lot of similarities. But again, I will concentrate on Kazakhstan. This is mainly because of mismanagement and because of the current structure of the gas market. So Kazakhstan has so-called main buyer gas market, which is very unique, very interesting. Basically, there is no, strictly speaking, gas market at all in Kazakhstan, because it's very monopolized, there is no competition. Strictly speaking, there is one buyer, Kazakh Gas, which by law has a right of first refusal. Basically, he has a right to buy out all natural gas from the subsoil users. And on top of that, Kazakh law requires this gas to be sold to Kazakh Gas as a single off-taker at the price which basically makes production of natural gas not profitable. So as a result of this strange gas market model, on the bright side, Kazakhstan managed to proceed with gasification of its remote areas, because when there were a lot of profits, there was big profits from export of gas. Basically, Kazakh Gas made local producers to sell it gas at a low price, and to export it to China, to other countries at the big price, and making a big profit, and at the basis of this extra profit, subsidizing local population and investing in gasification, gas infrastructure, building gas pipelines to remote areas. But again, time have changed. Kazakh gas cannot proceed anymore with cross-subsidization because it doesn't have enough gas, not only to export to China, but even to supply local population and local industries. As a result, underinvestment, as you can see on the slide, deterioration of existing and no new gas infrastructure, and struggles to meet export commitments. So again, the problem is the current regulation, the current gas market structure is not good anymore. So why it took Kazakh government so long to proceed with long overdue reforms? Why Kazakhstan, being so energy rich, so gas rich, not to proceed with what Professor But mentioned, with liberalization, with reforms which already have been tested in other parts of the world? Actually, Kazakhstan tried, and you can see on this picture the results of the first try. A lot of you probably heard about Bloody January, when Kazakhstan government tried to liberalize just part of the market, which is liquefied petroleum gas. And once Kazakhstan government tried to do so, the result was immediate. It was big social unrest in January 2022, which led to basically overthrow of the political regime of the first president. His monument you can see on the picture, and with quite big political changes in the political landscape of the country. But again, this is just to make the point that the issue of reforms, the issue of using the gas as a basically as a tool for controlling the population is a big problem for the countries of Central Asia, because from the period of Soviet times, common people, they got used to cheap utilities. They got used to cheap water. They got used to cheap natural gas. They got used to cheap power. So in order to be able to proceed with any reforms which are pushed by some international development banks like EBRD, World Bank, etc., the governments of Central Asia, they have to think twice, because if they will proceed with such kind of reforms without due preparation, without due understanding of the consequences of such reforms, they easily can end up with the same situation we had in Kazakhstan in January 2022. So let's get some better understanding what's going on right now after January 2022. Okay, Kazakhstan tried first to proceed with reforms. It's failed. The Kazakhstan government was changed. President declared that prices caps will be reinstated, but at the same time, President Tokayev, the current president of Kazakhstan, declared and said that Kazakhstan shall proceed with liberalization. And on official level, it was made clear that energy market in general and gas market in particular shall be based on the principles of competition, of transparency, basically all the postulates, all the ideas which usually promoted again by the Western scholars, by the Western experts, by the Western banks, and by the Western consultants. Right now we have three main policy documents. You can the titles you can see on the slide. I will not waste time on this. I will come back to the main idea. So the main idea, Kazakhstan government from about, first of all, the Kazakhstan government changed the management of the main player, which is Kazakhgas. So Kazakhgas, which basically the national gas company, has been changed, and it proceeded with long overdue reforms. Certain steps already have been taken. For instance, from last year, new formula have been introduced for the Kazakhgas to be able to buy out the gas produced from subsoil users. As I mentioned before, the law actually basically made production of natural gas unprofitable. Now, certain steps have been taken in order to make production and of natural gas to be more lucrative business. The problem is that Kazakhstan declared these plans. Kazakhstan took certain steps, but it's not very clear, entirely clear, at least to me, from what I read, the policy documents from the last page of my presentation. It's not very clear how and when these steps will be taken. And there is a big risk that with the latest developments, with the impact of war in Ukraine, and one of the indirect impact of the war in Ukraine is the trilateral gas union we just mentioned, because before there was no even any, nobody actually could predict that at some point in future, back, for example, even 2 or 3 years ago, nobody even could predict that Russia sometime will export gas through Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan. Nobody even could imagine that sometimes this could happen. Actually, there were some ideas, but in practice, nobody even considered as an option. So what we have now, we have an option for cheap gas from Russia to be exported to Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan now faces a dilemma of a tough choice, either to proceed with unpopular gas market reforms and risk another social unrest, or again, just to rely on Russian cheap gas and keep the status quo in regulation. And actually, the question is very interesting because it's not very clear whether which of these decisions will be the best decision for the country, or at least in the long and in the short run. So if President Tokayev, and my guess is, again, I'm not a prophet, I cannot predict what kind of steps will be taken in practice, but my guess is based on my experience of a citizen of Kazakhstan who lived with our bureaucracy, with our who knows how our officials thinks. My guess is that, my subjective opinion is that most likely, because of these latest developments, in particular with this big interest from Russia to use Kazakhstan as a transit country, and with big interest of Russia to divert its energy export to south through Kazakhstan and to east, Kazakhstan government most likely will decide either to postpone or to delay indefinitely the liberalization of gas market, because again, at this stage, it makes sense to proceed with all goals it has right now, with gasification, with fulfillment of contractual obligations, with development of oil and gas chemical complex, etc., without dangerous, without risky political movements like gas market reforms. Because again, if you are making any reforms, if you are trying to lift any caps on socially important products like gas, you immediately face risks of social unrest. Main conclusions. It seems that it's not only Central Asia will be dependent from Russia. It seems that Russia will be dependent from Central Asia, from Kazakhstan in particular. It seems that Kazakhstan will play the role that Ukraine played a long time. That is a key gas transit country for Russia. And it seems that for Kazakhstan government, it will be a risky but potentially very beneficial role, which if it will use wisely, it can use for the benefit of the country. That is to proceed with the modernization of the economy, using cheap gas, which is more or less ecologically friendly. Because again, there are certain doubts between experts, and I have personal doubts as well about the need for Kazakhstan to rush for the renewable energy sources, because renewable energy is a good thing if your economy can afford it, and Kazakhstan, strictly speaking, cannot afford it to switch as other developed countries. Kazakhstan shall think twice, and Kazakhstan shall be practical, and shall use any opportunity it has to proceed with modernization of its economy, of its industries, using the most efficient energy resources. And it seems that natural gas is the one, and it seems that Kazakhstan has a good opportunity to influence Russia and make Russia dependent from it, using contractual and legal instruments Professor But mentioned before. So the big risk is that such easily accessible and cheap Russian gas in the long run can make Kazakh government to be much too much relaxed and to be hesitant to proceed with still required market reforms. So again, I don't say that gas market reforms are not needed. What I'm saying is that most likely Kazakhstan government will postpone them and will proceed with them in a not speedy manner, but hopefully it will do these reforms as needed. Thank you, and I think I already took too much time. Thank you.
Okay, no, this is perfectly fine, Shamer. Then thank you, really, the both of you, for your really excellent presentations. I mean, I said in my introduction remarks that we had two real experts on these issues, and I was really not joking. So we have now we have time for discussion. So I'm gonna maybe ask in the room here. Do you have any questions, please? Okay. All right. So let's move to, I received some questions for our online audience. So the first one is the increasing complexity of the energy shock seems to be a feature of ecological overshoot as per capita food production peaks and begins to decline, driving up food prices. So in what ways does this experience lead to breakthrough thinking to allow and manage the growth of per capita energy use? And can the market be managed to accomplish any decrease of carbon emissions that are thickening the greenhouse gases and condemning the world to ever increasing temperatures? And in a way, another question which is related to that, how do you examine the potential and feasibility of developing renewable and low carbon energy sources in Central Asia?
Okay. Should I start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So thanks a lot for the questions, and thanks to Shemerden for his perspective. So to answer the first and the second question, yeah, they are indeed related. In my view, it's absolutely crucial, as I've explained in my presentation, for Central Asia to engage in and achieve two objectives and engage in reforms to achieve these objectives. The first one is energy and use efficiency improvement. And that means modernizing the infrastructure, the infrastructure and also the end users facilities. And the other element is clean energy. And this so massively promote clean energy sources. So we need energy efficiency improvements. I mean, both elements are related to pricing, because I think the first and actually the second question have an element of pricing, affordability in mind. I won't discuss the element of food and food dimension, but pricing. So it's extremely important, in my view, to protect consumers against price shocks, against supply shocks and price shocks, and this in the short term, medium term, long term. So how do you protect consumers against price shocks? Well, it's not by getting additional gas supplies in the system. It's by helping them to improve the efficiency of their consumption. And I think that should be the absolute priority. It's for the government, with international support, to invest in end-use energy efficiency. Right now, we see essentially subsidies, all kinds of subsidies, mostly hidden subsidies. We see supply of gas and of other energy products below essentially even cost recovery level, but also obviously below the cost of externalities. And with externalities, I mean environmental externalities, but I also mean security externality. We're not paying for our dependency on Russia. We're not paying for the risk of future disruptions. And then when disruptions hit, then we pay the price. So we need to take that into account. And of course, it's extremely difficult to increase prices. But this can be possible if the population is helped, if the population is protected, not by by access to cheap gas, but by access to subsidies in terms of energy efficiency improvements. And I think there has to be massive international support for that. And I think that's already happening to some extent, but that should be the priority. And so that would help absorb supply shocks and limit the pricing issue sensitivity. And this would then help with the implementation of pricing reforms. Because I think right now the problem is that the infrastructure is inefficient and consumption is inefficient. And at the same time, and so this inefficiency actually creates a big risk. And that's the reason that the government will again opt, as governments have done in the region, and actually including Europe for a long time, they will opt for cheap, so access to cheap additional gas. In my view, this is not a long-term option. This creates the dependencies that we've seen can be weaponized, as we've seen in Ukraine repeatedly, but also in other countries in the region, and mostly recently in Europe. Efficiency improvements help to avoid this. Then clean energy. Clean energy is one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest alternative. So I disagree with the idea of cost, particularly if you include all costs into the picture, environmental externalities, security externalities, and cost recovery pricing. So that is indeed what actually should happen, in my view. And again, international support is needed. And I think there's a lot of momentum, as I said. So this is how it could be developed. From a legal perspective, different approaches are possible, but long-term contracts, investment, auctions, investment agreements, etc. At the same time, there has to be some level of price reform, because the clean energy has to be competitive. It's not, if you include all costs, it's more affordable. But obviously, it will become extremely interesting to invest if you price in the real cost of energy, of fossil fuel energy.
Shaim Erden, do you want to add anything?
No, actually, I fully agree on this point with Professor Bud. So nothing to add from me.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to say again to our online audience, please don't hesitate to send your questions to me directly. And second, before we go to the next question, I mean, we got a comment, maybe, I don't know if you want to respond to that. I mean, so the exploitation of gas is actually controversial. And one comment we got is that gas is not ecologically friendly. It's a hydrocarbon and puts more carbon in the atmosphere. Do you want to bring any comment on that, Anatol or Shaymer?
Yes, so gas is a relatively less carbon intensive fuel compared to coal, but obviously it remains fossil fuel, and if you burn it, you emit CO2 emissions. Gas is extremely damaging to climate change at production level. If you think about all emissions of methane, that's extremely damaging, and that's what's going on. If you look at pipeline leaks, who are actually a big problem in many of these countries. So that's methane being leaked, and that's one of the very most aggressive greenhouse gases. So again, from a climate change perspective, that's an urge. It should be a priority. We need to, I mean, the region needs to modernize. The region needs to improve the efficiency of consumption and of the entire infrastructure, and then perhaps then think about whether they want to invest in additional production. That's according to the International Energy Agency roadmap to net zero emissions. By 2050, there should be no additional investments in oil and gas production. So decarbonization should happen now. I mean, as soon as possible. So yes, I agree with the point made. I think all efforts should go into clean energy and modernization. And this is not in the region just an ecological necessity and a part of the international, or part of the contribution to international climate change mitigation effort. It's also a security issue, right? I don't think the region, I think the region should learn from what is happening to Europe in 2022. The region should learn what has happened in previous years. There is a huge cost associated to dependency, and that's a security externality. And you cannot, I understand that there is a huge, that is a hugely challenging task to reform the market, and that pricing reforms should be implemented with great care. I fully understand. There's enough, there are enough precedents to illustrate that point. Kyrgyzstan has faced a similar issue when it tried to increase electricity prices. Kazakhstan is a recent example. Other countries face similar problems. So we need to think about carefully how to sequence the reforms. And clearly, I think energy efficiency should be prioritized in that sequence. Corporate restructuring reforms should be also extremely important, because right now, a lot of the money is wasted in commercial losses and technical losses, so no one knows where the money is going. And that has to be addressed, again, from an ecological perspective, a climate change perspective, and from a security perspective. This should be the priority. And it's not, I think, a good development, what is going on. I disagree that this is an opportunity for the region to get cheap Russian gas. This is just going to delay much needed reforms. This is going to reproduce what we've seen has happened since Soviet times, as I've tried to explain. Since Soviet times, discounted gas supplies have been used to essentially artificially subsidize energy-intensive behaviors, both industrial and household consumption. And right now, we've seen the cost of this, the energy security cost of that, the risk of weaponization, the dependency. But again, there's also the climate change issue. So thank you for bringing that up. It's an extremely important part of the picture. I've done work on decarbonization in Uzbekistan. It is actually the most cost-effective way of ensuring security of energy supply by 2050. It is to decarbonize. So that all attention should be on that, instead of getting additional volumes of Russian gas. If it's a temporary solution to some temporary problems the region is facing, it's okay. But reforms, but as Shema then pointed out, the real risk is that this is only going to delay the implementation of reforms. And that's not good news based on previous experience. And we have to keep in mind, that's why I think all these studies on these dependencies, they're extremely important because they point out how the cost associated to that, to this dependency. Thank you.
Thank you. Shaymer, then, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. The only point I want to make is that I fully agree that in the long run, the goal shall be renewable energy as the only source or the main source of energy in Central Asia and Kazakhstan in particular. But my point is, we cannot afford at the moment to proceed with reforms or with energy transition as if we are developed and rich country. My point is 80% of power produced right now is in Kazakhstan, roughly 80% is from coal power plants. And we have a lot of natural gas, we have a lot of our own reserves. On top of that, we now have opportunity to import gas from Russia at very low price. We have an option now. There is discussion now to proceed with actually nuclear power plants, which can be potentially even more dangerous for the country and for the region from ecological perspective. So having in mind that our infrastructure crumbles, having in mind that our population cannot sustain at the same pace the new renewable energy, actually power plants, energy from renewable energy power plants, because our national grid already cannot cope with the inflow of power from renewable energy, and there are some actually doubts about whether the energy transition which is going on right now in Kazakhstan promotes just energy transition, because there is a lot of discussion right now about so-called just energy transition. And my point is, renewable energy is not per se secures just energy transition. And to be able to proceed with just energy transition, countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan have to think about the most practical way of reforms and of changing the source of energy. And one of the options which can be used is, again, use the geopolitical changes, like, again, tripartite gas union as opportunity. And again, think about it as opportunity in a wise way. That is, not to become too relaxed. Again, with the Kazakh government, this is a big risk. The Kazakhstan government, as Professor But rightly noted, Kazakh government can just think that this is the best option, just not to do any reforms at all. I mean, this would be worst case scenario for Kazakhstan.
Thank you. So we have only 3 minutes left, but before we close this event, as we're in the United States here, I would like maybe to bring the US on stage here. And my question is, so in this complex geopolitical context, how do you think that Washington should strategically engage with the region to balance the influence exerted by Russia? And maybe to follow up here what Sheymerden was just saying, maybe by contributing more to the development of renewable energy, or how would you see that?
Yes, I think US EAEU is already working on this, and this is important and should be continued. I think all kinds of measures focusing on renewables are to be implemented. And of course, the just transition is important, but I think from an energy justice perspective, renewables provide now the most affordable option for consumers. So that should be promoted. So how? Well, clearly advise on how this can be rolled out, how reforms can be implemented, how advise on the best legal framework, and sharing best practices on how countries that have been successful with this rollout of renewables, how can Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, etc. could learn from these experiences, and taking into account, of course, the local institutional characteristics. And Sheymerden, of course, is right to point out these very important institutional constraints. So it's unrealistic to try to advocate for, for instance, the European approach or some US models and just copy paste them there. I think we need to take into account the very acute local institutional and informal elements, including the geopolitical dimension, and then adjust the mechanism. I think also and I know this is controversial, but working with China is important. And I think continued cooperation with China, so US-China in relation to Central Asia is important. China could help invest. And I think here a dialogue is necessary because it could help the transition there, and that would help essentially energy security in the region and therefore stabilize the region. So yeah, I think one thing is designing the proper legal regulatory framework that will enable this, possibly providing financing to accelerate the transition, to invest in infrastructure, and then international cooperation, so involve the regional partners and work with them because they are also ready to invest and see how this can then be to the benefit of energy justice, as Shimaden mentioned, and a transition to affordable energy, taking into account local institutional characteristics.
Thank you. Shimaden, one more word before we close. Do you want to add anything here?
No, I fully agree with what just Professor But said. So nothing to add. Thank you.
All right. Well, in any case, I mean, we really need to conclude. So I would really like to thank you a lot, really a lot for this very, very impressive presentations, plus the discussion. I would like to recommend very strongly, I mean, both Shimaden and Anatol papers and Anatol books. So I would repeat, I mean, especially encourage, sorry, to read the two most recent ones, Energy Dependence and Supply Security Energy Law in the New Geopolitical Reality, so which was published last year. And another one published in 2019, Energy Security Along the New Silk Road, Energy Law and Geopolitics in Central Asia. So you will get to know much more, even more than what Anatol and Shimaden said today. So thank you really to the both of you. We apologize for the technical issues we had at the beginning of this event, and we also thank all our audience for the discussion, and we look forward to seeing you in one of our upcoming Central Asia Program events. Thank you very much and have a very nice day. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.